We've spent a lot of time looking at the different tools that you can use to create artwork inside of Illustrator. So we're now going to go ahead and use all of that new knowledge to build this little owl cartoon character. This is where we'll get the character together, but if you want, you can take the next step and kind of spruce the owl up a little bit by adding some gradients to the owl, and you can also alter the path to create the jagged ears. So you will have the ability to kind of spend some time on your own to improve the overall look of the owl. But together, what I'd like to do is go ahead and create this basic version of the owl. To do that, we need to create a new document. So let's come up to the File menu. Under the File menu, you can choose New. This will open up the New Document dialog box. I'm going to go ahead and set the orientation to Portrait. Then I'll go ahead and click OK. So the first thing that we want to do here is we want to turn on the grid. That's going to help us essentially plot out where we need to place the different elements associated with the owl. So let's come up to the View menu, and under the View menu, we can choose Show Grid. And when we do that, the grid will be displayed. Now, this grid really isn't tight enough in terms of the grid boxes that are being created, so we want to modify that. If we come over to the Preferences, which we can access here on the Control panel by clicking the Preferences button with the Selection tool highlighted, you'll notice that there's an area called Guides and Grid. And so right now we have one subdivision every 72 points. I'm going to go ahead and change that to every 16 points. Then I'll go ahead and click OK, and you'll notice we have a tighter pattern now. The next thing that we want to do is we want to show our rulers. So let's come up to the View menu, and under the View menu, we can choose Rulers, and then we'll choose Show Rulers. So the very first thing that we need to do to create this owl is draw a circle. Believe it or not, his head is a circle. And as I hover over this portion of the owl, you can see that that is the case. So let's come back to that new document, and we're going to choose the Ellipse tool. With the Ellipse tool, we want to choose a brown or tan fill color, and we don't want to use a stroke color. So I'm going to go ahead and choose None for the stroke. The next thing that we want to do is we want to draw the circle. Now, we want the circle to be a very specific size. To do that, we can go ahead and click once, and that's going to open up the ellipse. Now, right now, the ellipse is set to a point system, and I think it might be a little bit easier to work in pixels. So again, I'm going to go ahead and cancel out of this. I'm going to come over and click the Preferences button here on the Control panel. Then what we can do is come over to Units. And what I want to do is set General to Pixels, and we also want to set the Stroke to Pixels. Then we can come over and click OK. And once we do that, we're then ready to click once. And what we want to do is set the width to 200 pixels and the height to 300. And the height to 200 pixels. So I'm just going to tab into the height text field. Then you can go ahead and click OK, and it creates the circle for you. Now, what we want to make sure is that the circle is centered within at least one of these grid lines. So I'm going to come over and highlight the Selection tool. Then I'm going to zoom into the circle. Remember, the keyboard shortcut to activate the zoom tool is Space Command or Space Control on Windows. And you want to make sure that this center anchor point is in line with a grid line. Now, what you can do is come up to the View menu, and from the View menu, you can choose Snap to Grid, which is located down here towards the bottom. Once you do that, if you click and drag to the left or to the right a little bit, it should snap to an intersecting line. And in this case, it doesn't seem like it's really doing that. What's happening is this line here is snapping to the grid, which is fine. We don't necessarily need the circle to be exactly 200 pixels by 200 pixels. It was really just a starting point. So what I'm going to do is hold down the Shift key, click and drag in a little bit to scale it. Now, Snap to Grid here is actually making it a little bit more difficult, believe it or not. So I'm going to turn it off now. It was good to get this edge positioned, but now that that's positioned, we can come up to the View menu again and turn off Snap to Grid. Now we'll have the ability to scale this and make sure that we get this right edge right on a grid line. So that's pretty much what we're looking to do. So that looks pretty good. Now, this is important because we're going to set up some guides so we can create the ears for this owl. Let's go ahead and drag out a couple guides. I'm going to go ahead and drag one down horizontally. We want it somewhat in the center point. In fact, I'll come up maybe one grid box from there to place that guide. And then I want to do the exact same thing vertically here. Now, these guidelines will make it easier for us to set anchor points for the ears. And we're going to create the ears by using the pen tool. So come over and choose the pen tool. You want to use that same fill color. So I'm going to come over here and select that. And what you want to do is click with the pen tool where the guideline meets the edge of the circle. So if you click, you're going to go ahead and create an anchor point. Then what you want to do is maybe come up just about to the top of the circle. I'll say one grid box below the circle, and you want to click again. Then you want to come over to the left. And in this case, I'm going to come over to the left about 3 grid boxes, and then I'm going to come up 4 grid boxes. So that's where I want to position this. And that's beginning to build the left side of his ear. Then you want to click here in the center where the top of the circle meets this vertical guideline. You want to click and drag out about 2 or 3 grid boxes to create a curve within the owl's ears. And then you need to essentially establish the right side of the ear in the opposite location of the left side of the ear. So if you really wanted to, you could just count grid boxes. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then we hit the guide. So now what we need to do is count over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Now there are other ways that you could do this to essentially mirror the image, but I'm not overly concerned about that right now. Let's just go ahead and set this point. And then what we need to do is come over here. Remember, you want to be essentially 1 grid box below the top portion of the circle, and then come down here where the guideline meets the edge of the circle. And so that essentially completes this. We'll have to tweak it and modify it a little bit so we don't see this curve closing, but we're pretty close. One way to easily fix that is to move the circle up a little bit or to scale it. And that's something that we'll address in the next movie. But if you wanted to see if everything was aligned properly, again, just drag out some guides. So the tip of the ears looks good. I can click and drag out a guideline here. They essentially come down the same way. So we're in good shape. In the next movie, we'll fix this small little problem that we have here, and we'll also take a look at how we can add the eyes to the owl.